Hello again everyone, I hope you're all keeping well. In this video I'd like to speak to you about why censorship is an act of self-harm. Too many people out there don't understand that when they are calling for the silencing or the banning or the deplatforming of political opponents or those who they disagree with, whose opinions they disagree with, they're actually calling for the shutting down of their own free speech. And that's a terrifying thought, really, that they don't realize they're doing this. You see, by saying to corporations, as is the case with this phenomenon of social media giants who are silencing people, who are banning them outright, be it in the case of Alex Jones, be it in the case of Gavin McInnes or whoever else, you see, when you're doing that, you're telling the corporation or government, right, implicitly, that you are in favor of authoritarian control. And therefore, it's okay for them to ban you if what you say disagrees with their worldview, right, with their ethos. Now, what's the problem with this? This might seem like a sensible thing, perhaps even, to some. But here's the issue that they don't understand. The top hierarchies, right? The people that are at the top of the food chain in these hierarchies, in these corporations, are subject to change. What I mean by that is you'll get new CEOs, new employees that take over those positions, and then they might have a different ethos to what they do today. If it is, say, in the example of politics, if right now these corporatocracies are leftist in nature, they're very, very subject. They're inevitably going to change at some point. New people will come in. Perhaps they'll hold extreme right-wing ideas, and you won't know that because you can't probe somebody's mind. Even the ones that are there today, I would submit to you that most of them are actually totalitarians of a nature that you probably, if you're a pawn in this game on the left, don't understand. That is a fact. But again, people don't want to see what is happening because it's not just right-wing views that are being shut down. You also have moderate leftists, you have people on the fringes of the left, they're being shut down as well. Okay, but you don't hear about that. That's not publicized so much. Because, you see, the power players in this world of ours want to paint it as a straightforward dichotomy, left versus right. But that's not the case. That's not really what's happening. Anyway, I'll leave that be for the time being. But the central point is, when you're calling for the natural rights or the human rights, and the two are different, by the way, because they are not synonymous. They are a completely different idea. There's a completely different framework behind the concepts, if you will, of natural rights versus human rights. But let's say in either case, and I would say that free speech also is a human right. Okay? But let's say in the case of human rights, if you're calling for the infringement of any citizen's human rights, including free speech, well, how long do you think it's going to be before you get your rights infringed? How long is that going to take? And what form is that going to take? Okay, this is another thing. There's a very short distance between having people banned on social media platforms, right, and imprisonment. And people will say, how can you say that? Well, take a look at China. That's the blueprint if you really want to study it, right, as a country and what their policies have been. Anyone that speaks out against the government there, or its policies, or the fact that they have been abusing human rights, the human rights not only of their own citizens, but of Tibet, of Taiwan, of numerous countries. Well, if you say anything on social media that disagrees with that totalitarian regime, you'll be put into prison. The same thing happens in Russia, to a slightly lesser extent, but we're seeing that tracking. If you look at the direction it's going in Russia, they are very quickly moving back towards totalitarianism, if they aren't already there. And it's possible that they might actually move straight to either communitarianism or to communism proper again. You know, it's no accident that that's happening in these countries. You see also that the same thing, again to a slightly lesser extent, happens in Germany and also now the UK. Right? We are accepting. Has anyone ever wondered why these countries, these governments are so accepting of totalitarian ideologies? Has it not occurred to anyone yet why this is happening? It's to soften the minds of the people so that they will accept the totalitarianism of their own governments. You know, but again, leaving that aside for the time being, those governments, the people running them, or those corporations and the people running them, will change. It's entirely conceivable that the political arena will change. The people that end up running these corporatocracies, these establishment systems, will end up being different to those people who think that they are in agreement with the establishment today. They'll find themselves out of favour with it in a very short space of time. Now, don't take my word for it. Just let it play out and you'll see this happen. I'd much rather it didn't play out because I know what it's going to lead to. But I would suggest that it's important for folks to start understanding why we need to be able to speak our minds, why we need to allow for those we disagree with to speak their minds also. It doesn't matter to me whether, somebody's views are abhorrent. They might well be. But I would never call for the shutting down of their speech. Okay, and I don't care whether you're left or right. I've said this numerous times. I really don't care. Okay, because at the end of the day, there are going to be things that people agree with and that people disagree with, right? That's going to happen. In any given society, you're never going to have a singular point of view develop, because our experience in life, our experiences as human beings in this life is different according to what we go through as human beings. Okay? Our perceptions, are always going to be a little bit different as well. We're never going to have exactly the same ideas or exactly the same opinions or whatever else. That's not going to happen. All you get in totalitarian states, by the way, is this illusion that everyone shares the same opinion. It's never actually the case, right? They just want to maintain that illusion so as to project this air of superiority on the world stage. But that will end soon as well if we end up with utter totalitarianism, let's say world governance. If that happens, that will go out the window. And then it's just a case of showing, for the sake of superficiality, that we are in control, in charge of our societies. That's what these folks want to show. The ones that will ultimately end up ruling the roost. But that's never truly going to be the case. It never can be. There's another angle to this, another facet to this. I'm never going to cover everything, by the way, here, right? But there is another point to this, and that is that not only are you doing damage to yourself Okay, not only are you harming yourself and your own self-interest by calling for the censorship and the silencing of other people, you're also destroying your own ability to stand up, to be counted, to fight for what you believe in. But more than that, you're damaging your own spirit. And a lot of people say, what do you mean by that? Well, see, when you silence someone, are you preventing them from thinking what they're thinking? Or are you just punishing them for a thought crime? That's a very interesting question. Okay? Those thoughts are never going to go away. The stuff that's being silenced today will pop up in another form. It doesn't matter how you legislate, because these things are ever evolving. As Nietzsche rightly pointed out, we're always in a constant state of flux. Reality is always bending, changing, shifting. It is not ever going to stay the same. The political and economic systems that we've got today will eventually not exist. So all these things people think they're fighting for and dying for and this and that, those are subject to change too. Change is the central reality of existence, I would argue. But again, what does this have to do with the damaging of the spirit? Well, you're not fundamentally going to be able to eradicate bad ideas. And when you relegate them to a state of the unspoken, the unacknowledged, they come back with a ferocity that will tear everything to shreds, tear you to shreds. Because whatever it is, whatever it might be that you're opposed to, let's say for the sake of argument, to make this more concrete in the minds of many, if you were to say Nazism is a great evil, which it was. Let's say it is, okay? Now, there are no more Nazis, by the way. They all died after World War II. That's the other thing, right? They won't tell people that. But let's say, okay, you could distort that, which the popular media has done. Neo-Nazis, right? Neo-Nazism. What does that even mean anymore? Does that mean that the people that you're categorizing as neo-Nazis want to run around eradicating Jews or the disabled or homosexuals? What does it mean? But anyway, this phrase, let's just use it for the time being. So you want to prevent neo-Nazis from doing their thing. Right, to speak, I'm talking about here, not other things. I'm talking about speech here, to prevent them saying all the stuff that they say. Their propaganda, let's call it. And they do propagandize people that are on the extreme edges, right? It doesn't matter which side of the political spectrum, again, they fall into. The extreme right, the extreme left, whatever, right? So, let's say we censor those folks. Does that mean the ideas are gone? Does that mean those people have changed their point of view? No. Right? What's the one way that you change a person's point of view about something? Is to speak to them. But if you make it impossible for any person to speak to another person who, they have opposing viewpoints to, perhaps, you're never going to get anywhere. All you're going to end up with is an extreme sense of frustration because both sides can't speak with each other, and you'll get a breakout of violence. And any time human beings have resorted to that, we have seen death on a mass scale, we have seen destruction on a mass scale. None of these things are remotely beneficial to a human being, materially or spiritually. But nonetheless, we continue to do this for some. I don't know why. Why it is that so many, and we're talking hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, why they support these authoritarian measures, these totalitarian corporatocracies or governments. I don't know why. I mean, you can, to me, it's plain as day. If you do nutso things, you're going to get nutso results. You know, that's kind of the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and over again. But anyway, so that's the thing. I mean, you can't legislate goodwill. I've said this before myself many times, but it's not my quote, it's one from Malcolm X. The point he was making is you cannot make people, you cannot force them through acts of violence by states or corporations to fall into line well, you can force them to do that, I suppose, but you can't use violence as a means to change somebody else's thinking. It doesn't work. It doesn't happen. And the other problem is that if you have a dual party system in politics, let's say, or a dualistic worldview, right? If your society has developed that, say left versus right, and I understand they're false dichotomies, I've just said that, but let's go with this. This is how our societies are organized for the time being in the West. If we have this left-right paradigm, false as it may be, right, and you say that, well, we're going to obliterate one side, well, what are you left with? Are you left with a state of unified consciousness? The answer, plainly, is no. A lot of people think, hang on, surely that will mean that everybody would be unified then. No, it's not true. There's a reason for that. You'll be unipolar. You won't be unified. Okay, you'll be a unipolar individual or a group. You'll end up with a unipolarity. You won't be holistically balanced. Right? You just won't have that. Because you run into these purity spirals. You run into these purity spirals where no one is ever leftist enough for you. Right? No one is ever... Because nobody's ever... See, this is the thing about human beings. We don't like authoritarianism by our nature. Okay? We like hierarchies to some degree, provided they're functional, provided that they can be useful. But when they become perfunctory, let's say, when they become useless, and in fact dangerous to the well-being of the body politic of the people, then we very quickly turn against them. And it happens instantaneously when we see, once people's self-interest properly is threatened. Right now they can't see it because it's not overt. Okay, it's being done surreptitiously. Their rights are being chiseled away quietly. But once it becomes apparent, and we see this, the embers of this emerging with the arrest of Tommy Robinson, for example, or the silencing of Alex Jones, or whatever else. You see this happening. There are flames that are being kindled here inside the human spirit because there's something in human beings that's going, hang on a minute, this isn't right. You're trying to tell us what to do. We naturally have this wish to shake off the yoke of others dictating to us who we should be, what we should do, what we should think. But anyway, let's again put that aside, right? But this unipolarity which emerges in any group or any country or any nation, well, that then bodes very ill for that society or civilization in which that happens. Because again, you don't have holistic thinking, you do run into these purity spirals, and eventually nobody is good enough to join your group except you. right? It ends up being a very small clique of people, and the masses of people then turn against that clique because they have gone pretty much insane. They have become an extreme sort of OCD type personality where they've got a checklist of people that must conform to only their views, or otherwise, they don't include them. That's another point. Inclusivity. That's just come to me. I'm making this video off the cuff, but it's important to say this as well. So, a lot of the people on the left right now, because this is where the majority of the push for censorship is coming, and I'm not, lambasting the whole of the left, by the way. Understand this, okay? But as I say, the push is mostly coming from that political direction, if you want to think about it in these terms. So I would just call them pro-authoritarians, but again, in the left-right paradigm, false as it may be, these leftists, the extremists on the left, are pushing for it. But they're supposed to be in favor of inclusivity, right? Because the typical mantra is inclusivity, diversity, multiculturalism, and so forth, right? But here's the thing. You're not actually being inclusive, you're being exclusive. Although they say this, they're paying the idea of inclusivity lip service. If there is somebody who disagrees with their point of view, who is from any ethnic background, whatever it may be, right now they're focusing their anger and their wrath at themselves and what they represent, which is insane, again, because that's not a balanced mind, it's not a balanced psychological state to be in, to have hatred of self, of your own ethnic identity even. And it does matter materially, okay? But even those who don't fit into their paradigm, who don't fit into their idea of what constitutes, let's say, a black person or a Muslim person or whatever else, or a Jewish person, or whichever ethnic background you belong to, you're supposed to conform to this idea of being oppressed and therefore be part of the Marxist revolution. Because of the mapping of gender theory, of class theory, onto class theory, and also critical race theory onto class theory and so forth. So you're supposed to be on their side. But if you're from one of these groups and you disagree with them, well, they become suddenly exclusive. Right? That's the interesting thing. So that also is harmful, because again, you fall into this purity spiral, right? Because you only include those people that are the same as you, be it politically or otherwise. You're discriminating. You just are using a different metric to suggest what discrimination is. Okay, and I would say that, well, in reality, we probably all have to discriminate. We discriminate when we're categorizing certain objects, for example. That's how we differentiate one object from another. We also discriminate on other levels as well to discern somebody's skin color or race. This is part of the reason why when we fill out these questionnaires and they ask us, what are you? People quite comfortably tick the boxes that they think apply to them, right? And so, we naturally have this proclivity towards discriminating. Where this becomes a problem, of course, is when you start discriminating without basis against certain people again. You see, that this comes back to this whole thing of, and we haven't properly talked about this in Western civilization at all. We're not allowed to, right? Why are we making certain judgments? The area of heuristics has been trying to study this, to explore this. Other behaviorists and psychologists and other professionals in these fields have been trying to study these phenomena as well, including anthropologists, but we don't let them because their findings might be too controversial. You know, that's just insane. But again, the thing I was saying is that this notion of inclusivity only goes so far in the minds of certain types of people. At least, you know, and here's something funny, but see the folks that are far-right extremists, okay? At least they are honest about being exclusive. See the best individuals that we produced in the last century that fought for civil rights. They all said the same thing, whether it was Gandhi or Malcolm X, right? And even Martin Luther King Jr. at one point said something very similar, which is that at least you know whether racist that they're being racist because they're honest about it. But if you make it, see, here's the problem. If you make it illegal to be racist, then you make it illegal for people to be honest. Now you can't have dialogue. Now you can't, you know, you can't even, you don't know whether there's, see, once you, and this is the thing that shoots people in the foot and they don't realize it, people on the far left, is this, and I hate to categorize people like this myself, understand that again, right? But when people willingly become collectivists in whatever group and they categorize themselves, I think I have a right to. Anyway, so when you get people doing that, then you don't know, when you start legislating people's free speech, then you don't know whether they are being covertly racist to you. You don't know, for example, people who are hired through this affirmative action nonsense, right? You don't know whether you got the job because you were good at your job or because whether you belong to a certain minority group that has a preference in hiring practice, say in workplaces, over over somebody who is who is ethnically from their nation of origin, right, in their own country. So say in the case of, and I don't think this is overly controversial again, but these things unfortunately in these times are. But if you've got somebody who's white who's not hired, even though they might possess the same qualifications as somebody who's black or Pakistani or Indian or Chinese or whatever, right? You know, what is that going to do? Is that going to help solve the problem, or is that going to make it worse? Because again, you've got covert racism that starts to function on both sides of that equation. One, you don't know if the guy who's been hired, right, has been hired based on his merit, right? And secondly, the person who didn't get the job feels slighted, and they might not be able to fully cognate this, but they can recognize on some level, if it happens in the aggregate at a greater level, that they have been discriminated against themselves. These are serious problems. You know, we've never really sat down and properly thought about any of this. We're just throwing out these ham-handed ideas as if they're going to work. They don't. Right? We're just kind of patching band-aids all over the place in society and not really getting to the nub of where the problems are. Because again, we're not allowed to, because, oh, if we do that, then we're labelled, right? The people that ask these important questions so that society can function get labelled as being this, that, and the other. Be it, you know, these slurs are thrown out. You're a racist, you're this, you're that. None of that may be true. All you're maybe doing is inquiring, but they'll go, well, why are you inquiring? You surely must be at some level, you know, biased or bigoted or something along these lines. Well, what if you're not? What if all you're trying to do is figure out what the hell is going on in any given situation? Right? But again, anyway, so that's, you know, that's what's happening with the inclusivity issue. But there's another level to this as well, which is to do with the fact that these people that call for inclusivity, yes, they're exclusivists, but actually the problem is worse than that. Because they are failing to recognize something that is key and important, which is that all human beings, all human beings come from the very same origin. And I'm not talking about the way in which we evolved into very different people, but I'm talking about something else here, which is to do with the origin of life itself. It all came from the same place. That fundamental universal force which created life, created every one of you, created me. That is profound. But the inclusive, and the people who call for inclusivity and diversity and all this business, weirdly enough, don't understand that. They are still categorizing people, right? They can't help it themselves. They're still categorizing people as black and white and this and that and Asian or Indian or Pakistani or whatever. They can't seem to break through that barrier either. Isn't that weird? So that shows you their level of spiritual evolution. They're just unable to see that every human being is the result, the expression. Every person is the expression of this fundamental life force. Beyond that even, you're an expression of the universe itself. You are a microcosmic representation of everything greater that is out there. Now, that is a scientific fact again in any field that you study it, right? Be it biology, physics, chemistry, whatever. We're all made of the same matter at the end of the day, but how that matter expresses itself is different in each individual. Right? But that's the oneness of human beings. But these people, because they're stuck in the paradigm of left and right and this and that and, Marxism and capitalism and, all this, these nonsense things, this nonsense rhetoric that's pumped out over and over and over again by these political think tanks, by the education system, by you name it. They're all malfunctioning, by the way. Right? They try to tell us this nonsense that we have to categorize. If you're going to go down a spiritual route and unify humanity, that can't be the case. But here's the thing. We also cannot dismiss that there are differences in peoples. There are also differences in how we have evolved. The ways and means we use as peoples to survive, those are also different in various societies. Some countries, for example, which is one example of how societies form, right? In some countries you find that they value the intellect. In other countries you find that they value brute force and strength. But neither of those is a negative. I'm just pointing out, in evolutionary terms, neither of those is a negative. And they're different strategies for surviving. Because life is harsh and you've got to survive it. But everything goes tits up when you bring in dangerous ideologies. You see, ideologies are the problem. It's never philosophy, it's never science, although science without philosophy, I would argue, doesn't work very well. It can be misused all too easily, the knowledge that we gain from it. There's also the issue where science likes to dissect everything, and eventually in dissection you get down to what you think is the smallest thing, only to find that the thing isn't there at all, or it's not what you thought it was. But that's a different subject matter. I don't want to get too deep into that. My point was this. right? And I started the video trying to explain why censorship is an act of self-harm. It's an act of self-harm precisely because you're not allowing the spirit to unify within yourself and within others. You're not allowing that to happen. Okay, you're not allowing it to be exposed to even some dangerous ideas. Is it good for a human being to be exposed to dangerous ideas? I would say yes. Because you have to have some sense of what one thing is in order to know what its opposite is. You know? You have to... that's the way that, again, we function in reality, in this life. We separate things out. We categorize them. Okay? And it's useful to us for the purposes of living. Now, that doesn't mean that it's useful in every arena, in every avenue, but it is a tool. Okay? I guess that's what I'm getting at. And if we don't allow people to speak what the truths that they feel they have, and those may be incorrect, but then, if we don't do that, if we don't allow them to speak their minds, then what are we doing? We are allowing for our own growth as human beings to be stunted. Okay? And that is, again, as I say, a destructive act. It's an act of self-harm. All of it, fundamentally, is an act of self-harm. If you keep trying to do these kind of things, shutting people down, censoring them, you name it, you're going to find yourself ultimately destroying yourself. It's an act of self-annihilation. Right? Instead of allowing nature to take its course, to develop your ideas, because here's another thing. Do you think that people who have political beliefs came to those by themselves? No, they're other people's ideas and beliefs. The mistake we human beings make, and again I've said this before, is that we think our ideas are our own. Our ideas do not belong to us. They do not even come from us. Nobody really knows where thoughts come from, where they originate from. Okay? They just seem to organize themselves into a pattern within our minds. Because of the way that and I'm not talking just about the brain, by the way, but if you want to talk about the brain, how the brain functions is actually still quite mysterious. Not in the sense that we don't know what the brain does. We know perfectly well what it does. There are some things maybe we still don't know that we're trying to figure out, but for the most part, we know. But it's the fact that the brain does that specific thing at all, whatever it may be, when it originates the thought, or, well, it doesn't, my apologies, that's not correct. It doesn't originate the thought, but the thought organizes itself. Okay? It forms into a pattern that is then transmitted in the brain. And it mirrors. You see, the regions in the brain that when you think of one thing, let's say you think of an ice cream, I think of an ice cream, there are certain regions in the brain that will become active. Okay, so we'll have the same regions being used, the same synapses perhaps even. This is just theoretical, right? But, or it's a hypothesis really in some ways, but the same pathways will light up, and those will be the ones through which the thought will be transmitted. Okay? But the thought itself did not come from you. The thought itself, okay, it in turn was transmitted to you. It's like when I'm sitting here speaking with you. What is happening is that I am transmitting my thoughts via this medium, and they are reaching you. Okay, some people think speech is auditory. It's not. Some people, like, I was watching this phenomenal documentary a couple of days ago. I don't want to go on here, but I'll just share this with you, right? People think that we are hearing with our ears, okay, or the mechanisms that allow the vibrations to work in there, to be received in there. That's not the case at all. You think you're seeing with your eyes. That's not the case either. You think you're smelling with your nose. That's not the case. Okay, the brain is doing some really fascinating things. And then the brain is transmitting it to the mind, this is where it gets even weirder. Like, if you really want to look into it, the mind is not the same as the brain. The mind is matter. The brain is the organic matter. But again, I don't want to delve into that too much in this video because it will just confuse everyone. But the point is, as I say, I'll reiterate this fact that when you are censoring people, you are harming yourself. Okay? When you stop people speaking about things, when you stop them from exploring ideas, good or bad, you're actually going to find that society degrades as a result. You see, inextricably, the level of freedom you have in a civilization is linked, okay, it is directly linked to its progress. And you can see that today, actually, even the material gains that Western civilization has made stemmed from the fact that people were free to explore strange and new ideas, even bad ideas. Okay, but you take that away, you strip that away, pretty soon all you've got is a death spiral. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there for this video, but I want to thank you very much for watching. Take very good care of yourselves, and God bless every one of you.